What if you could change that relationship with that person that you look at as an opponent to your strongest ally? Today, we're going to talk about how do you think about it differently, change your mindset, and that can really change the game. Welcome to How to Get What You Want. This podcast is for driven women ready to claim their goals and navigate their careers with clarity and confidence. Join me as we explore real stories, tools, and strategies to help you steer your career exactly where you want to go. Let's get started on helping you get what you want. Hi, and welcome to Getting What You Want. I am so happy that you made the decision to be here today, and I'm so humbled by hearing from people who take the time to put this little podcast in their ear and really think about some of the things I'm saying. So thank you for letting me know that this has been impactful to you. I want to talk about, we all have these opponents in our lives, whether it's somebody that we kind of battle with. For me, it's Dan. When I was with a big company, we had this tension between us. And sometimes it's just the person in front of you that their goals or their objectives are so different than yours that they become an opponent right away. And we all face these people. And so I want to talk about this today because it is an essential of to get what you want, you have to think about how to adopt a negotiator mindset. And part of that is really shifting your perspective. And it's really hard, especially when we have an opponent that gets under our skin or we're frustrated. When emotions are introduced, it even makes it a little bit more complex because we really get zoomed in on what's important to us. But zooming out and seeing it from a lot of different perspectives is really important. And seeing it from their perspective can bring the language that you need to shift the relationship. When I was looking for some supporting research around this, I found a lot. Harvard really talks about, as a principle of negotiation, how important it is to focus on the interests of the other party instead of the positions of the deal and thinking about what's important to them. In fact, when I went to Harvard and took their negotiation and leadership course, one of the things that really stuck out for me was they said that when they send teams into doing scenarios of negotiation, the side that they tell to think about the interests of the other party for only 30 seconds, it shifts their perspectives and they have meaningfully better results. So just making that shift, even I love that metric around 30 seconds. And that's what they found in their research is really focused on the interest, what's important to that person. Northwestern University found that kind of same thing. When you take on the perspective of the other person, you find solutions in a more win-win, if you will. I'm using that very loosely. 30% of the time when that was put in place, thinking about the perspective of the other person as they were going along in the conversation. And then the University of Michigan looks at conflict resolution, and they said that there's so much power in looking at changing the us against the problem is the way to look at it instead of me against you. And that's just a shift of how you're looking at it. How do you reframe it? How do you get the other party to understand that the goal that you're going to? It's really that mindset piece. And it's so interesting because when we are just like ready for it and we are like, you know what, this meeting's coming up, it's high stakes for me. I got to figure out how to win. It zooms us into what's important to us. And that's not always the best way to get collaboration. It doesn't mean you have to shift. Being collaborative isn't about giving in. It's about leading with curiosity and moving through to better understand both sides so that it can be a conversation. And collaboration is really looking at the partnerships and looking at the conflicts, but figuring out how do you get through. The Journal of Business and Psychology also looked at trust and how trust plays such a strong part of how people work together. Trust means being dependable, doing what you say you're going to do, showing that you are going to follow up. Trust is building that relationship. And without trust, that is not going to be a component that you can really lean on going in. So it's important to think about when you're thinking about the interests of the other party, but also what is the trust in the relationship? And what they found was the teams that fostered trust and really thought about them had better outcomes. They increased their collaboration, how they work together, And that was a really important study in 2016. They also looked at giving first, that rule of reciprocity, and they found this was actually an Academy of Management review did a study on what happens when one party gives more than the other party first. That can build that trust. In my last podcast, I talked about how reciprocity is something to be really thoughtful about. Usually, reciprocity is if I do something for you, you'll do something for me. But giving first can be really powerful. Doesn't mean you have to give always. That diminishes that act of giving. But being really thoughtful about what can you give first. They have found that it is a really great place to start a great partnership. And then the last one that I'll mention is just looking at the organizational citizenship behaviors. When you offer assistance to other people when it's not expected, when you mentor other people, when you give advice outside of what your normal day to day is, they found that those are highly valued by people and people notice them. And you become a trusted resource because of those acts. So there's a lot of ways to build up this collaboration, either indirectly and directly. It really is related to your influence with that person within the organization. That's another calibrator of how people look at you and how they're going to follow and how they're going to want to collaborate. So when you think about who is an opponent to you, think about that person and what can you shift moving forward. And even thinking about when you move into a new conversation with new players, what are these assumptions that you're making that you're kind of thinking it's me against them, it's me needing to win. And maybe it's a time that's a trigger for you or an opportunity for you to zoom out and think of how do you build on these foundations from this research about trust, about giving, about showing in other ways how you invest in others. So I'll tell you how this has showed up for me and some of my clients, and then I'll give you some tips to really consider. Hey, Susie here. Thought I'd pop in. I wanted to let you know I've been an executive coach for over a decade. I work with executives and they call me their silent partner because I help them increase their confidence when they're facing really difficult decisions. If you'd like to see if we're a good fit, head over to susietalmanchuck.com and fill out an application. I'd love to hear from you. I've had so many opponents in my career. It wasn't difficult for me to think about just a few stories personally that I could share. I remember one of them was my boss and I had gone to LA to meet with my peer that was there. His name is Mark, and we were talking about a new project that we needed to collaborate around. And Mark was just somebody that wasn't easy to work with. He wouldn't show up to meetings. He would do different than he said he would. But whenever senior management was in front of him, he just looked like a nice guy, but he was collaborating, working with everybody. So it was so maddening. Not just me, but other people within the organization saw these two different personalities, like putting the shine on for the management, but yet for his colleagues, he kind of was a pain. It was hard to get information from him and he wasn't responsive. Oh, I can just like go right there. My boss was meeting with the two of us talking about this new project that we had to embark on. Instead of looking to the future and thinking about how we could work together, I was so focused on what I didn't like about Mark and all the things that he didn't show up well and wanting to show my boss those things that every time he said something that was collaborative toward the project, I talked about an example that wasn't related to the project moving forward, but was a thing that got in his way. And he would simply say, I wasn't aware of that. I didn't realize that was a problem. And it would just make me so mad that I became more and more just frustrated at him. And I kept pointing out these things that weren't bringing us to where we needed to go. He was playing it so well. And what also added to the situation was my boss knew me so well that when I got a little bit edgy and when I was like kind of like going after him, she sensed that. She saw it not only in the words I was using, but she could feel it in the emotion that I was putting out. Man, I got in so much trouble for that because I just did not show up well for my colleague. And I got in my own way for that. He played it really well. Just thinking about that collaboration, it's not a great example around how we turned it around, but it's a way you see that you have to figure out in those conversations, how do you get yourself out of that and think about what's important? If I would have thought about what's important to my boss wanted to see that the two of us were collaborating on this new project. And she wanted me to focus on what did I need to do in the future. She wasn't going to solve the problems of the past. I didn't think about it from that perspective. I was like looking at it as a way to make him look bad, and it didn't work. It really backfired. Another example that came to me was I was working with Dan. Dan was my opponent, if you will, another colleague of mine. It sounds like I had a lot of colleagues I didn't get along with. That wasn't true. It was the minority. Dan and I were we were equals, and it was always about getting the customers the relationship. And so sometimes it was unsure if I would get the relationship or Dan would get the relationship. So I remember there was a big client who had come in and we were having an initial meeting and pitching our services, and Dan went too. And instead of being focused on impressing them with our data and what we needed to move forward, I was so focused instead of thinking of the interests of the client. I was watching and paying attention to how they were viewing Dan. And when he would say something and he would make a good point, instead of then adding to his and showing a collaborative approach, I was looking at how to make him look bad. And so that client ended up not really liking the dynamics of the room. And if I would have only thought about what was the goal of the meeting, if I would have recast it for myself, it wasn't about me against Dan. It had nothing to do with me against Dan or me against Mark. It was about shifting that mindset in my own head to move that forward. And who knows what would have happened. I've seen this work really well in practice where as I've been able to, I think I was suffering a little bit from immaturity for sure in those times. And as I understood that that was a short game, there were many other examples when I felt like doing that to that person in the room, but instead reframed it for myself. And we did build a really collaborative relationship around that, just by making that mindset shift. I have a friend who was telling me recently, he's actually a client of mine. He does some big deals, and he was talking about a deal where it was going south and both parties had put months into it. It looked like there was one point that was just going to be a deal breaker. And they all were they were putting their hands, up in the air saying, I don't think we can get this done. This is really something that neither of us can overcome. And he said it wasn't until they both kind of put their books down and their pencils down, if you will, and they just kind of joked around about what if? What if we could find a solution? And they allowed themselves to get a little creative. And guess what? They actually stumbled upon an idea that made them pick their pencils back up and say, oh, we hadn't thought about that. And what happened was they were focused, they were having great dialogue, but they hadn't really thought about how do we unlock some more? How do we really restate the problem where we're going so that we both can bring these great brains together and be creative to get to a solution that will work for both of us? And so it took that shift. So that is something that you might consider too when you're in a dialogue and there's just doesn't feel like there's room for growth, when there's room for creativity, maybe there's tension in the room. What do you do to shift that? That's what happened to him. And he said, man, it was so interesting just to see that from nothing, all of a sudden, we actually got the deal. Thinking about the relationships of the people around the room are super important. I'm going to give you a couple tips that you can use to really think about that opponent. What do you need to do to shift that for you in your head? How do you shift the dynamics of the room? How do you even get them to look at you as an ally so that they can make a shift for them? Because maybe they're just playing defense and they're not realizing that there's an opportunity, and you might be able to shift that for you and change that opponent into an ally. As we jump into these tips, I want you to think about a scenario that's coming up for you that's high stakes, could be a negotiation, could be a difficult conversation. It might even be something that's coming up that ends up going south, and you might be thinking about, what do I need to do to shift this? So the first tip is to really reframe the problem. Be really clear about where you're going. Be open to telling the other person, this is the goal that I have. How can we get there together? And framing it as not me against you. It's not you against me. It's really, how do we work together to get toward this goal? So, how do you need to do that? Maybe it's in those first moments when you said, you know what, I know we've met a lot of on this topic. Let's really reset where we both need to go. And even thinking about how are they going to react to that? Will that make them more open? How can you frame it that you've thought about this for them? A really great way of saying it is, I know we've run into some stumbling blocks in the past, and I really have been thinking about and gotten some advice around how do I reframe things for people so that we can find a common goal. So I want to try to do that for us today. This is the goal that I think we're going for, and this is what's important to me. What's important to you? Spend some moments there recalibrating together so that you know that you're marching side by side instead of facing each other at battle. Thinking about that reframe and how do you do it is the first tip. The second one is in the moment, stopping and applying silence, but asking really good questions. Don't assume you already know. Use phrases like, that was really interesting. Can you tell me more? Or, I didn't understand that that was really important to you. What I heard was this. Am I right? What else do I not understand about what's important to you? Don't assume you know the answer, even if you ask a question that you are 99% sure that you understand the answer to. Allow your mind to say, there might be more that I don't understand. Don't be locked up in here because you will not be listening. You won't listen actively to understand. And that's extremely hard to do, especially when you're focused on the goal, especially when you're focused on winning. When it's high stakes for you, you tend to be in your seat and it's harder to do that. You're zoomed in on what's important to you. So in those moments, it sounds really easy to practice silence and ask good questions. And the key is to really listen to what they say. That's the key to really unlocking what's the next step you can take. What is a deeper understanding that you could have? We prepare so much, which is great. It's a foundational aspect of getting ready for a high stakes situation, but don't assume you know everything. Lead with curiosity. Look for a deeper understanding into what you don't already understand about what's important to them. The third one is to figure out what are those small wins that you can get at the beginning. This is a great strategy that negotiators use. And what the research shows is when people start to say yes and get agreeing to things, they tend to agree more and more. So, what you want to do is get that momentum going. But those initial asks or those wins that are easy for the other person to give to you, it helps them feel like there's some collaboration going on. It's breaking the ice, if you will. It's showing movement. And if there's something that you can give, an easy give that you can give to them, that allows them to see this rule of reciprocity where what can they do for you too? They understand that you're not just going at what's most important to you. You're illustrating with your actions that you want to give them something at the very onset so that you can get some momentum. It's such an important aspect. It's a mental thing. It builds trust and it helps you really align with the other person to think about that. And those small shifts right at the very beginning can grow a partnership. It can help the other person understand that you're willing to look at it from their perspective. Framing it well and giving them something and talking about those wins that you can get moving on. The key is when you get somebody to trust you, you allow them to get more creative. It's when we're zoomed in and we're battling is when we're zoomed into what is important to us and we don't even see what the opportunities are. So zooming out and providing this atmosphere of let's gain some movement can help everybody become more creative in the moment. It's important to think about these things. The three tips are to really reframe it, reframe the conversation around it's not you against me, it's us against the problem. And what is that solution we're getting to? That's the first one, is that frame. The second is really listening, actively listening. Don't assume you know it all. Listen for something that is new to you, something that you didn't already know. And then the third is, what are those small wins you can give right away? What is the way that you can unlock some movement, some momentum so that the other person feels that too? That builds trust, that builds partnership, that gets you toward that goal. What are you going to start doing? Which one of those can you apply to, or all three, to a high stakes situation that's coming up for you this week? Anything. As a situation where you've been putting off a difficult conversation that you needed to have. When you focus on these tips, it gives you something that allows you to take the emotion out of it and think about these things. So use these tips and then share with me what worked really well for you. So before you just move on, think about this prompt. How can I change the way I show up in the meeting with that person? You fill in the blank who that person is. But how can I show up differently in that next meeting, situation, scenario? Just by shifting the way you show up to somebody that may know you really well, they may not consciously be aware of it. They won't say in their mind, what is going on? This is so different. They may notice it, but it will shift the way they show up. So just try it. Think about, what are you going to do to show up differently for that person? This is such an important thing. And remember that collaboration isn't about giving in. It's really helping the other person understand what's important to you, but that you understand what's important to them too. Not just the issue on the table, but what's important to that individual. What are their interests? And that foundation of trust is a really key component in moving somebody from being an opponent to an ally. And once you build that, I've had people that I went round and round with in my past and then really worked on the relationship and brought them back. I actually have a friend that wouldn't even take my call. And I really worked on changing the way I showed up. And now we are really great business partners. So, what can you do? It can really work. And it can start with how you show up. Next time you face a difficult conversation, think about how you're going to adopt a negotiator mindset so that you can get what you want. That's the power in being intentional about moving through, whether it's a partnership, a conflict, whatever it is. I talk more about this in my newsletter. Go to negotiationlove.com if you want to get more free insights, advice, tips, and stories. I'm so glad you made the choice to be here to consider how to get what you want. And remember, negotiation is more than a skill, it truly is a mindset.